99 years ago, this week, on the 2nd of November 1917, the British government signed the Balfour Declaration that became the birth certificate for the modern state of Israel. During this period of history, the British Empire was the world superpower of the day. It was engaged in a battle against the German, Austro-Habsburg Empire and the Ottoman Empire during the First World War. In London, when the British government was signing the Balfour Declaration, the British and Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, known as the Anzac Forces, defeated the Ottoman army for the first time in the Battle of Beersheba. This was a decisive victory in the Negev that would lead to the liberation of Jerusalem a couple of months later from 400 years of Ottoman rule. The main characters in this drama to re-establish the Jewish people in their ancient covenant homeland in the Middle East was the British Foreign Secretary, Lord Arthur Balfour, and Chaim Weizmann, leader of the Zionist movement. Their friendship between an evangelical Christian and a Jew would change the destiny of Britain and that of the Jewish people. God entrusted the nation of Britain to be the instrument to bring about his purposes in fulfilling his words through the prophets of bringing the Jewish people from the four corners of the earth back to their ancient homeland. He used Britain just as he had raised up the Persian King Cyrus to bring the Jewish exiles home from Babylon to rebuild the Second Temple. The Balfour Declaration is being remembered and celebrated as we approach its centenary anniversary by Israel, the British Jewish community, and Christian Zionists as the document that would lead to the re-establishment of the State of Israel in May 1948. The Christian movement that sought to work and pray for a Jewish national homeland started during the time of the Lord Protectorate Oliver Cromwell, who welcomed the Jewish people back into Britain in 1656 after they were shamefully expelled in 1290 by King Edward I. This movement was led by other courageous Christians and political social reformers like Wilberforce and Lord Shaftesbury, who helped to establish the first evangelical church in Jerusalem to help the Jewish people prepare to return to the homeland. It would be the rise of Jew hatred in Europe that would trigger the need for a national renewal, as in the 1880s the dreadful anti-Semitic pogroms committed in Russia by the Tsar would trigger a mass expulsion of the Jews from Russia and Eastern Europe. Many of the Jews that fled Russia came to the Ottoman province of Palestine, inspired by the teachings of Marx, to create a new society and establish the kibbutz movement. The kibbutz movement is the agricultural settlements based on shared ownership that are only found in Israel. It would be the events in France at the end of the 19th century, the birthplace of Jewish emancipation, that would inspire Jewish journalists of the urgent need for the Jewish people to have their own state. In 1894, Jewish captain Alfred Dreyfus was falsely arrested and accused of spying and selling French military secrets to the Germans. This sparked a wave of anti-Semitism in France, with questions being raised about French Jewish loyalty to the French Republic. Theodor Herzl, a Jewish journalist from Austria, was covering the court proceedings and was shocked by the outbreak of anti-Semitism in France, sparked the Dreyfus affair. This led to Herzl to write his book Der Judenstaat, The Jewish State, and created the Zionist movement that campaigned for a Jewish national homeland in the Middle East. Theodor Herzl's dream of establishing a Jewish homeland led him to have a meeting with the Ottoman Sultan Abdul Hamid II on the 19th of June 1896. Herzl offered Abdul Hamid to pay off the debts of the Ottoman Empire in return for some land in the Palestinian territories. This was a response from the Ottoman Sultan. Advise Dr. Herzl not to take any further steps in this project. I cannot give away a handful of the soil of this land, as it's not my own. It belongs to the Islamic nation who fought for the sake of this land and watered it with their blood. The Jews may keep their millions. If the Islamic Caliphate is one day destroyed, then they would be able to take Palestine without a price. While I'm alive, I would rather push a sword into my body than see the land of Palestine is taken away from the Islamic State. This will never happen. I will not start cutting our bodies while we're alive. It would be the events of 1914 that would change the fortunes of the Zionists, as a series of alliances across Europe broke down after the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife in Sarajevo on the 28th of June 1914. This was followed by the Austrian-Hungarian empires declaring war on Serbia and Germany signing a military alliance with the Ottoman Empire and then declaring war on France by invading Belgium. This led the British to declare war on Germany, and then the Austrian-Hungarian Empire invaded Russia. That became the First World War. The British were at war with the Germans and the Ottomans and had a military presence in Egypt because of their control of the Suez Canal that connected Britain to its empire, in which is said the sun never went down on the British Empire because it covered a quarter of the globe. The British War Cabinet supported the idea of a Jewish state in the Levant because they believed that this would serve the British Empire's interests in having a friendly state next to the strategically important Suez Canal. The British War Cabinet, that included Prime Minister Lord George and Foreign Secretary Lord Balfour, were Christian Zionists who favoured the establishment of a Jewish homeland in the Ottoman province of Palestine. On the 2nd of November 1917, Lord Balfour wrote his famous letter that would become known as the Balfour Declaration to Walter Rothschild, leader of the British Jewish community. His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and would use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in other countries. The Balfour Declaration would mean nothing if the British and the Anzac forces could not liberate the Holy Land from Turkish Ottoman control. The Anzac forces had failed to defeat the Ottomans in Gallipoli in January 1916, meant that they re-established their forces in Egypt to start their fight against the Ottomans from the south. In the summer of 1916, they failed to defeat the Turks in Gaza, but won a decisive victory on the 31st of October 1917, the Battle of Beersheba. The final phase of this all-day battle was the famous mounted charge of the 4th Light Horse Brigade, commencing at dusk. Members of the brigade stormed through the Turkish defences and seized the strategic town of Beersheba. The capture of Beersheba enabled the British Empire's forces to break the Ottoman line near Gaza on the 7th of November and advanced into Palestine. In London, at the signing of the Balfour Declaration, the British War Cabinet did not know about the military success and the defeat of the Turkish forces at Beersheba, proving that sovereignty and the province of God. This meant that the British control of Palestine would mean that they could start to implement the Balfour Declaration and help the Jewish people prepare for their own homeland again in their ancient land. It is also not to be forgotten the incredible sacrifice made by the British Jewish community fighting for king and country during the First World War that contributed to Britain's victory in the Great War. The friendship between Lord Balfour and Chaim Weizmann, who went on to become Israel's first president, represents the power of God at work in making history when Jews and Christians come together for God's purposes for Israel and the Jewish people. What made the signing of the Balfour Declaration possible was the strategic relationship between Lord Balfour and the leader of the Zionist movement, Chaim Weizmann. In 1904, Weizmann was appointed as a chemistry lecturer at the University of Manchester, and Arthur Balfour was a Conservative MP and Prime Minister representing a constituency in Manchester. The two men met in 1905 to 1906, and it was during their meetings that Weizmann persuaded Balfour to support the Zionist cause of building a Jewish homeland in the Middle East. Lord Balfour was blown away by Weizmann's passionate advocacy of the Zionist cause that brought him to tears. He said at the end of their meeting, "It is not a dream, it is a great cause, and I understand it." It was Chaim Weizmann's development of a new means of producing acetone needed for British shells significantly boosted the British war effort and helped turn the war against the Germans in Britain's favour. Looking back at the Balfour Declaration as we enter into the centenary anniversary of this document that became the birth certificate for the modern state of Israel, Britain can be proud that God entrusted this great nation with his plans for the re-establishment of the state of Israel on the 14th of May 1948. God had raised up the British Empire to carry out his desire to help reconstitute the return of the Jewish people to their ancient covenant homeland, just as God used the Persian King Cyrus to gather the Jewish exiles back to Jerusalem to rebuild the Second Temple in Jerusalem after its destruction by the Babylonians. Sadly, the British government after the First World War would renegade on their promises to create a Jewish homeland in the British Mandate of Palestine, but this should not distract from the important role played by British Zionist Christians in helping to re-establish the State of Israel. If only Lord Balfour and Chaim Weizmann could see the Balfour Declaration has produced nearly 100 years on, that the State of Israel has become the fulfillment of the Zionist aspirations for thousands of years, a vibrant, modern, democratic, high-tech nation that has become a beacon of light in a very dark region. Lord Balfour and Chaim Weizmann played their part in fulfillment of biblical prophecy concerning the rebirth of the nation of Israel in the Bible, in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 16, verses 14 to 15. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that it shall no longer be said, the Lord lives who brought up the children of Israel from the land of Egypt, but the Lord lives who brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north, and from the lands where he had driven them. For I will bring them back into their land which I gave to their fathers.